Thank you. Good to be back once again. I think it's our last presentation and literally the last one for the IP showcase, so you're good for a nice closure. Um, I'm doing this presentation on behalf of my colleague, who is not here with us. He's alive. I promised not to make this joke, and now I realize that I'm sorry. So actually the PICS that I will be talking about is the project in SEMT is driven by my colleague Pavlo Kondratenko, who is the document editor, and Lee Whitcomb, who is the chairman of the activity. So I'm representing them, but Willem is here in the flesh, and he will talk about his child, who is the RP 2110-25 in a moment. So this is part of a wider effort to make the interoperability easier, not to make it better, right? We will make it better eventually. So the vendors are working on it, the users are asking for it, but can we make it easier? And so we thought that to achieve this goal, we need to have three pillars, right? So the consistent method for testing the implementations, the method to understand that the standard is implemented correctly, and the method to do the measurements. And they're all kind of interconnected. So how do we plan to achieve that? The consistent testing method is there. It's the JTNM tested program. We've reported on it already at the IP showcase. The method to know that you've implemented standards correctly would be the ST2110 PICS. And the method to do the measurement is, of course, the RP2110-25. So how did it all start? It's been a thorny road towards the open interop events and tested events. It started with the typical dirty hands, and then the industry realized, okay, we kind of need an external view on this, and if we make it public, the community will kind of come together. So it did, and we started doing the tested events that uncovered a lot of things that we can just make better. We can make some quality of life improvements, but also some shortcomings in terms of how things are reported and how things are measured. So for those who absolutely don't know, and I don't know if anyone still is not aware of the JTNM tested event, have you been living under the rock or what? It is a program for open and responsible testing of the implementations of ST2110 and AMWA NMOS. We basically gather a bunch of people together with a bunch of equipment. We lock them in a big warehouse at Riedel in Germany or sometimes somewhere in the US. And we make sure that we go over every single box through a series of criteria, through a series of tests, and we make sure that the boxes are doing what they're advertised to do. So how does the PICS help? First of all, what is PICS? PICS started in the Audio Engineering Society, the first in this media and entertainment world, as far as I know, but there are PICSs for other standards. But the first thing that we've seen is the AS67 PICS. And it's basically a way to interpret the standard and also assess against the standard implementation, because who except Arne, except Greg, and except our colleagues from Matrox, who did read at least one of the ST2110 specs? You did, okay. How was your experience? Did you like it? Did you enjoy the process? Okay. Anyone else? Can I have someone else? Okay. So I did not enjoy that process personally. And so when I looked into AS67 PICS, it kind of helped break down the standard, because especially in the upcoming revision of the AS67, we have an interesting clause there, for example, where you say you shall implement protocol version A, you should implement protocol version B. If you implement protocol version B, you shall make the protocol version B a default. Try to unwrap it in your head. This is probably one of the more clearer ones, right? So, but there are more cryptic sentences there, and then as you start to break it down, you need to find those keywords like the normative language, right? The should, the shall, the may, For those who live in that world, that's perfectly fine. But for simple mortals, not always. So PICS is basically a way of what PICS does. It goes through the standards sentence by sentence, and it breaks down those normative statements, categorizes it, and then builds it into a table that says the statement, the severity of the statement. Is it a shall? Is it a should? And then basically, if you have implemented it, yes or no. There is also options for adding some additional support language, right? So like, how do you really interpret that statement? What does it really mean? And of course, we work very closely with the drafting group to not misinterpret or mislead, but also some of the optional things, like for example, some of the requirements that are applicable only for senders or only for receivers. Of course, you would not assess the whole implementation against that if your implementation is a sender, but the requirement is for the receiver. So that's basically what's going on right now in SEMPTI. They're writing a bunch of recommended practices for every single document in the ST2110 suite. They're publishing a recommended practice as a separate document, which is the PICS, breaking down the standard into little bite-sized statements, and that the either the implementer or the end user can take it and say, okay, for my tender, for example, or for my test plan that I would like to introduce, and it really works in complementary to the JTNM tested, right? Because you can, with this, build your own mini JTNM tested, saying, okay, this requirement, this particular requirement is super critical for me. So I will only look at the devices that have a checkbox in here saying, yes, I support that. And then you can design a test against this, or you can use one of the tests that are provided in the JTNM tested portfolio and just say, that's my tender, that's my selection procedure. So in order to align the measurement devices for that and to help kind of normalize the way we test when we design those tests, Willem has started the project to design the RP2110-25, and he will now tell us more about it.
Well, thank you, Ievgen. Dash 25, measurement practices. Why is it needed? Well, actually a while ago, I think we were still in the Dirty Hand events. We saw a lot of those measurement kits out there already that read the specifications, and they built something, and well, I had some questions afterwards when we were comparing things. So actually, a simple question to you guys: what do you see as we speak right now on the screen? It's pretty simple. It's a tool to measure volts, right? Now, something from a complete different vendor, complete different age. It's a machine to measure volts. And I can go on with all different machines from different brands, different vendors. And if it's measuring 1 volt on the one brand, it's 1 volt on the other brand as well. There might be a little bit of tolerance here and there, but actually it is the same thing. Now, completely in the beginning, this was actually missing a little bit with 2110 measurement kit. So there's a lot of stuff out there, excellent measurement kit, but actually those measurements, they didn't have the same name. Sometimes they did, lucky us, but sometimes they didn't. That's confusing. That's confusing not only for guys who are doing the test, but also for clients who buy that piece of kit and then completely don't know what's going on. So excellent measurement kit, but the nomenclature, that was a question mark. And in any of the 2110 specifications, standards, there's nothing described that this test shall be named like this. But also the formula, it's not defined. So even some of the things that were measured, sometimes it was a plus, sometimes it was a minus, depending on how you look at it. But sometimes the numbers were completely different as well, because there are other things like formulas maybe around the corner. So let's dim the light here on the slide a little bit, and let's first try to explain where with Dash 25 we try to clarify things a little bit. So in the middle you see the gapped packet reach schedule. That's something that's quite good defined in 2110-21. Nothing spectacular about this. But the moment we were at the Dirty Hands event, I said to the guys, well, I'm measuring your TR offset, and it seems to be a little bit off. And the guy rightfully said to me, how can you measure TR offset? That's within the receiver. So suddenly we thought, okay, maybe we should describe not time of the packet when it gets read out of your receiving buffer. Maybe we should describe the time the packet arrives at your receiver. It sounds fairly simple, but it gives a hell of a difference if you want to talk to people. It's just nomenclature, nothing more. So we did a few things like TR offset, which is the difference between the most recent integer multiple of T-frame and TVD. And then we said, well, what's the first packet timing? We also defined FPT as an abbreviation so that everybody will use the same thing. And we say, okay, that's TPA0 when your first packet arrives at your receiver minus n times T-frame. It's rather simple, but it was needed, it seems. So going through the document, there's a lot of things more to come. And then actually there's margin. Margin defines, well, how many of those packets do you have in your buffer before your reader actually starts to use those packets out of the read schedule, out of your receiving buffer. So there's margin, we defined a few other things. And then actually when you look at it, it's a fairly easy way to describe how a VRX buffer is running. You see, packet arrives, the buffer is building up, a packet gets read out of the buffer decreases, and if everything is nice and stable, you see that you get a nice, more or less sine wave, or block wave, I should say, more or less around the middle of the buffer of your receiver. So, pretty easy now, after so many years, right? So we try to describe all of these things, and we even said, well, there are ways that you can measure and that you still don't get the same number. How is this? Well, some clever colleagues within the test and measurement industry said, well, you have the full window where you can do the measurement, like when there's the full frame, even before the gap and at the end. But maybe there's the steady state window where you see these nice block wave going around the middle of your receiving buffer. This is maybe also an interesting piece of information to only look over there. Some of the measurement kit was only looking over there. Other measurement kit was looking over the full frame. So immediately you could see that VRX, your minimum buffer size, well, if you look over the full size, it's 0. But if you only look in the steady state window, in the best case, you're in the middle of your VRX buffer. That's one of the twists that we noticed. So we've defined all those things in -25. So if you read this document, everything should be fairly easy. So what else did we do? We did some interesting Excel theories to see what would be better or what would be worse or different as well between all the different methods. So I just mentioned there are formulas. But there's something else as well. You cannot do everything with a formula. So there are big procedures to do the VRX buffer, for instance. Now, there's something we call the history method and the residence method. I won't go into the details. If you read the document, you have the details. But if you push your 2110 signal a little bit to the borders, you get different results. And this is because all those pieces of kit use different methods. So we describe them. And it should be, well, it should be fairly easy to read that and to understand why a different piece of kit gives you a different result. And even at some point we did a measurement in EBU list and a full simulation of what could go wrong. So we created a fully scattered signal and looked at different methods and algorithms, how those numbers would react. Now, luckily, it falls all more or less between good boundaries, so there shouldn't be a big problem at all. So it's not only just the formulas, it are algorithms as well. There's, well, this is the algorithm to measure the C buffer. That's pretty straightforward. VRX, that's a little bit longer. I won't bore you with the algorithm, so I'll skip to the next slide. The most important part is that we defined measurements. We defined the abbreviation, how the measurement is called, what the measurement is doing, and the formula. So if you have PICS measurement kit that complies with RP-25, you'll find these measurements, and you find what the measurement is, how the formula works, and it should be fairly easy working like this. So for video, for audio, for dash 40, we've defined those things, so everything is out there. So it should be fairly simple now. So Ievgen, would you like to wrap up maybe? Oh, I'll go ahead. Very good. So I think with all the pieces of information that were delivered about the JTNM tested, about the PICS, and with Dash 25, I think we can address all those issues. And at the end of the day, it's the customer who should be confident in 2110 kit. Well, if you have measurement kit that complies with Dash 25, if they can read all those fancy things that we've made, but with a simple thing like a PICS, then probably we can increase the confidence in this technology. So I think that's it. So if there's any questions, I would be glad to answer them.